Sorry. Hi, guys. I think I was on mute before, but thank you for joining us on our press call today. My name is Morgan McLeod. I'm the Communications Manager at the Sentencing Project. Our call today will highlight our latest report, Still Life, America's Increasing Use of Life and Long-Term Sentences, which finds a record number of people serving life in U.S. prisons. You should have all received an embargoed link to our report in your press release this morning, and the full report will be available online at sentencingproject.org at noon Eastern today when the embargo is lifted. We will hear first from the report's author, Ashley Nellis, and to help put the report in context, we will also hear from Evans Ray, whose life without parole sentence was commuted by President Barack Obama, and Steve Zeidman, City University of New York law professor and counsel for Judith Clark, a New York prisoner who received a 75-year to life sentence in 1983. If there are questions at the end, we'll have a Q&A session after all the panelists have presented. You can either submit your questions in the question box in your GoToWebinar control panel, or you can feel free to submit questions throughout the presentations, or you can click on the hand icon on your GoToWebinar control panel, and I can unmute you and you can ask questions directly to the panelists. So let's begin first with Ashley Nellis, the author of Still Life and Senior Research Analyst at the Sentencing Project. Ashley?
Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for joining this call, and we're really excited to be releasing this report today to all of you. So I'm just going to get started right away with the main findings of the report, and hopefully you can all see my screen. I'm going to have some slides that show some of the highlights of the data that we were able to obtain. So first off, we now have a record number of people serving life and life without parole sentences in the United States. 1 in 7 people is serving some form of a life sentence, which amounts to 206,268 people, or 14% of our prison population overall. Of these, about 50,000 are serving life without parole. About 100,000 are serving life with parole, 180,000 are serving life with parole, and an additional 44,311 are serving life in prison by definition of 50 years or more as their sentence. It's a de facto life sentence, or a virtual life sentence is sort of a growing term that's being used to account for these folks. So our state and federal look shows that the heavy use of life sentences is not confined to a particular region of the country, but in fact is used around the country. And at least one form, and more typically all 3 forms of life sentence, are used in each state and in the federal government. In fact, in some states, as more than 30% of people in prison are actually serving a life sentence. So the Sentencing Project has some long-standing concerns about people at the deep end of the punishment spectrum, and we have produced a number of reports on the topic in the past, starting with a major national report in 2004. And in this report, we were able to show that life sentences were a considerable portion of prison, and that's only gotten worse since that time. Having had the opportunity to collect this data a number of times gives us the ability to show long-term trends. And what we find is a few different important things. One is that despite some modest declines in the prison population that we've seen in the past 5 to 6 years, we still see this soaring life sentence population. And this also is happening amidst a sustained decline in violent crime, including murder rates that have happened over the past 25 years. So also with this long-term look is able to show is that life without parole is growing much more quickly than life with parole, a difference of 59% growth between 2003 and 2016 versus 18% for life with parole. And so sort of another way of looking is that there's been a near quintupling of the life sentence population since data were first collected on the topic in 1984. And so while we tend to think that life sentences must be reserved for the worst of the worst, our data, which collected we collected data from all of the states and the federal government on all of these three categories of life sentences over a 6-month period in 2016, shows that it's actually not reserved only for the worst of the worst. In fact, a fair number of people are serving for non-homicide crimes. In fact, 41% of people serving life are there for a non-homicide. And over 17,000 people are there for a non-violent crime. And it's important to note here that the federal statistics are a real aberration here. The federal system stands out in stark contrast to any of the states for its extraordinary use of life sentences for non-violent offenders. In fact, more than 2/3 of people serving federal life have been convicted of a non-violent crime, including 30% for a drug crime alone. Another sort of feature of the life sentence population is the extent to which the United States sentenced juveniles, people under the age of 18 at the time of their offense, to life in prison. So here we find that there are almost 12,000 people serving some form of life, life with parole, life without parole, or virtual life, for a crime committed when they were not even 18 years old yet. And this slide here presents states that have more than 500 juveniles serving life sentences. And then a third sort of feature of the system is this de facto life. So these are people who have not previously been counted because they're not technically life, but they've been sentenced to a term of years that they're not likely to outlive. But this is the first ever count that's national in scope of virtual life sentenced people, and it is important because it provides a more accurate portrayal of the people in prison who stand to die in prison simply because of the length of their sentence. So here we find that there's 44,000 people all told. States like Indiana, Louisiana, and Montana stand out because they have more than 10% of their prison population serving virtual life. And finally, turning to race. So disparity, of course, is a pervasive problem in the criminal justice system, and it is evident, of course, also in life sentences. Here we find that about half of people serving life are African American alone, and that means that 1 in 5 Black prisoners has a life sentence across the country. In 6 states that are mentioned in the report, more than 2/3 of the prisoners serving life are African American. So just 1 more minute for me to talk about sort of what do we think we can do about this. Well, states are really looking for ways to curb the growth of mass incarceration, and we think that's great. We're encouraged by those developments at the state level, and we think that more should continue. But we're concerned that they're too limited in their scope, and in order to truly challenge mass incarceration, we're really going to need to dig deeper into the prison system and look at more people who might be qualified for release, both at the back end, and then look at the ways and the whys of why we're sending so many people to prison for decades upon decades, when we know from scholars in this area that people tend to age out of crime, and that recidivism rates of people who have served life prison sentences and who are fortunate enough to be released are extremely low. So I'm going to leave it at that and turn it over to the next speaker, who I believe is Evans Ray. And let me just work with this for just a moment. And hopefully I've stopped sharing my screen and we can go back to the group.
Thanks, Ashley. And yes, now we'll hear from Evans Ray, who will tell us a little about his experience serving a life sentence in the federal system. Evans? You can go ahead and unmute yourself, Evans.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Evans Ray. December 16, 2004, I was arrested and lumped into a conspiracy to sell cocaine. If you go back to the early 90s, I had received 2 prior drug charges for small amounts of crack cocaine. Those gave me 2 strikes. Go forward to December 16th, 2004, would give me my 3rd strike. First trial was a mistrial. Second trial, they severed everyone, so I'm out of the conspiracy now. They felt like they didn't have enough evidence. Well, my judge, Alexander Williams of Greenbelt Federal District Court, didn't want to give me life. They served me 851 papers because of my 2 priors. The judge felt like he had, because he said on both trials that he just said that he didn't feel like life was warranted. He called it cruel and unusual. So he sentenced me to 324 months for 60 grams of crack cocaine. The prosecutors appealed that. It went to the appellate court. The prosecutors won. They brought me back in front of the judge. Judge Alexander Williams put on the record for the Court of Appeals that he still felt this sentence was cruel and unusual. He said, but his hands was tied and he had to adhere to the law. So he sentenced me to life plus 10 years. That was in 2007. I was sent to Big Sandy Federal Penitentiary, one of the highest level penitentiaries around. I was a nonviolent offender. Never had a fight, never fired a pistol, anything. It was tough. I stayed there about a year, a lot of stabbings, a lot of fighting, a lot of bad stuff, man. You had a few good men, though, that just did what they were supposed to do. I left there in '08 and went to McQuarrie Penitentiary. I stayed there for about 10 years. I programmed, I kept myself busy. I kept classes going from, you name it, from Narcotics Anonymous to victim impact, domestic violence, anything I could get started just to keep my mind from running amok and me thinking about that life sentence. What I do want to tell you guys about, men and women, about having a life sentence, you good in the daytime when you moving around with everybody, going to chow, going to the rec yard, and so on and so forth, the law library, church. But when they lock you in that cell at 8:45 at night, you can feel that sentence eating through you. You can feel it killing you because you know you're going to die in prison. 2014, I received a letter from Federal Public Defender's Office in Greenbelt. They gave me an attorney, Ms. Sapna Murcha-Handa, to help me with the PG-14 clemency project that Obama had set out to help guys with nonviolent, unfair sentences. By 2016, in August, I received a phone call saying that I was going home. It was unbelievable. It's surreal. I still don't believe it. I can't believe this. What I do want everybody to know is that these mandatory minimum sentences that they have, they are unfair. They're harsh. There's no way possible that 60 grams of crack cocaine was supposed to get me a life sentence. I mean, it's just unbelievable. I was around guys that had murdered, killed, pedophiles, rapists, some of the most heinous crimes you could think of. They had 25, 30 years. I'm sitting in a level 6 penitentiary with life plus 10 years. I kept myself busy. I'm home now. I get to spend time with my mom, my family is awesome. If it wasn't for them, I don't know where I'd be right now out here. I'm family oriented. They stick by me. They support me. They keep me focused. I keep myself busy. You have to stay busy. So when the call came for me to come in and speak, I had no problem with it. Somebody has to address the issue about these unfair sentences and about returning citizens. You need a support group to help men like myself so that they don't fall back into that web. Prison is no place nice. It's just terrible. You have to stay focused. You have to stay spiritually grounded. And you have to know that once that revolving door opens up, it just keeps going. the things that I know now, if I knew back then, I wouldn't be I wouldn't have gotten incarcerated. I'm not saying that I was a saint. No, I made a mistake. I did something wrong. But my wrong didn't deserve life plus 10 years. What I ask today is that everybody just try to stay focused on these mandatory minimum laws. It's going to be a little hard, especially with Trump in there. We got to work together. We have to stay together. And if there's anything that I can answer or any questions, I have no problem with that. Thank you so much for letting me speak. And I hope that everybody has a wonderful day. This is so surreal.
Thank you so much, Evans, for sharing your story. Now we're going to hear from law professor Steve Zeidman. If you can please share your screen now, who will tell us a little bit more about Judith Clark's case.
Sure. First of all, thank you for inviting me to participate, and a pretty remarkable story we just heard. And I guess Judy Clark's story is in many ways similar, but some important differences. Judy was arrested in 1981 for her role in the robbery of a Brinks armored car that resulted in the deaths of a Brinks guard and 2 police officers. She was ultimately convicted of felony murder, which is important, meaning she wasn't alleged to have actually shot anyone, fired any weapons, but she was convicted for her role as a getaway driver. And the crime, to be clear, it grew out of a commitment to revolutionary radical politics that had spilled over into violence and extremism. And those feelings continued into the trial. Judy and her co-defendants chose to represent themselves. They clashed frequently with the trial judge. So at the end of the trial, when she was ultimately convicted, the judge sentenced her to 75 to life, which was the absolute maximum permissible sentence. And what's most important is what he said at sentencing. He went out of his way to say, there are a lot of letters I've received urging me to give you a minimum sentence to take into account all the potential that you have, but in my view, you will never change. And for that reason, I am sentencing you to 75 to life. And for me, that's the crux of the discussion for today. The idea that people can never change, because in this case, the judge was wrong. He did not predict the future. Judy, by every single account, has changed dramatically. The judge ignored her capacity to change, the human capacity to change. Judy did change. She's transformed into someone who has accepted and acknowledged her role in this very serious violent crime. She's expressed public remorse for what happened. She has a record of achievements that is hard to overstate. Not only personal growth in programs, but working with prison administration, prison staff, for and on behalf of others. So the question becomes, Judy's now been incarcerated for 36 years. How, if at all, can she get out of prison when you have a 75 to life sentence? And in New York State, the 75 to life means you must do the 75. She will see the parole board in 75 years when she's 106 years old. And that gets to Ashley's point about de facto life sentences. Frankly, from my perspective, I think life without parole, or these de facto virtual life sentences, we should really call them what they are. The judge is sentencing people to death in prison, and that's what Judy faced. So her only avenue was clemency, an application to the governor of the state of New York. It's enshrined in the state constitution. It's grounded in the concept of mercy, that if people have shown themselves to have changed and to be a fit subject for mercy, then clemency is appropriate. In the governor's executive clemency bureau, Governor Cuomo, they vetted Judy's application for years, went over it with a fine-tooth comb. The governor met her personally, talked with her at length, and ultimately, December 30th of 2016, her application for clemency was granted, to the extent that he reduced the 75 to essentially what she had already served, 35.5 years, meaning she was now eligible for parole. So is clemency one way to address these sentences? Yes, but what we are doing across the country and in New York is a drop in the bucket. There are thousands, tens of thousands of people who are also fit subjects for mercy. But let me just give you the back end of the story. So Judy became immediately eligible for parole. She had her parole hearing in early April of this year, And less than 2 weeks ago, the parole board denied her parole, scheduled another hearing in 2 years. And I think what that presents is a challenge if we really are going to tackle these sentences. Not only do we have to ask our executives, whether the president or governors, to reconsider clemency, but across the country we have to re-examine parole. Parole systems across the country are so broken, so unregulated, so opaque. And New York is a prime example. There were a series of articles in the New York Times just last year about the political aspects of the parole system. Who becomes a parole board commissioner? And it turns out it's a naked form of patronage. What motivates their decisions? It seems to be it's covert or overt political pressures. Are there any qualifications, any training for someone who becomes a parole board commissioner? Apparently not. So then how does the parole board decide? If we got a bunch of people in a room and somebody got a sentence of 35 to life and now it's 35 years, we would want to know, what have they done in those 35 years? How have they grown? How have they changed? Have they acknowledged what they did wrong? Have they tried to atone, expressed remorse? Have they managed somehow to avoid any disciplinary problems? These days, there are risk assessment tools, evidence-based, to give us a sense of whether the person presents any threat to public safety. But instead, what parole boards do routinely when somebody is incarcerated for a violent crime is they look backward. They just deny parole, saying, based on the seriousness of the underlying crime. And the irony there is that's the one thing the person can never change. It's immutable, it's static, it's frozen in time. And to be clear, when people are coming up for parole on these violent crimes, they have been punished. Judy Clark has been in 35.5 years. She's 67 years old. There are countless others in New York and across the country like her. People who were sentenced to 25 to life and have been denied parole 7, 8, 9, 10 times. Perhaps the most well-known case in New York State is the case of John McKenzie, who after 10 parole denials, having been what on every measure is a reformed, quote, model prisoner, having been denied parole repeatedly, ultimately took his own life. And unless and until we wrap our arms around parole and change it from what it is today, which is a symbol of futility and despair to people striving to change their lives, unless we do that, I don't think we're going to make much of a dent in the problem of life sentences and mass incarceration. I'll leave it at that, and thank you for the opportunity to speak to it.
Thank you so much, Steve. And thank you so much to Evans and Ashley for participating. It looks like we actually don't have any questions at the moment. Oh, nope, we have one. Someone wants to know, Ashley, if there is any New Jersey specific info on life sentences, if that can be found in the report.
Yes, we have every state broken apart by life, life without, and virtual life, and also broken out by race, gender, and juvenile status, so including New Jersey.
And again, just a reminder, the report will be available on our website at noon today, but you guys should have all received an embargoed copy in your press release this morning. If there are any other questions, we can keep this short. Ashley, will you share the contact information slide for everyone?
Yes.
So it has Ashley's contact information and my contact information. And if you have any questions for Evans and Steve, we can get those questions to them as well. But thank you all so much for participating. And again, the report is available on our website at noon today.
Thank you.
Thank you. Nope, one more slide back.